is a big happy family. They all sit around a campfire with tents, don't they? And they're friends with somebody playing a guitar and looking into the flames at night. And Oscar and Lando have their arms around one another, and Zach's singing nursery rhymes.
Max is he's painting with an almost unlimited palette, whereas Lando's only using primary colours.
I would add to that. I'd say only primary colours, but he's got a lot of brushes. He's actually got a nice touch, but he doesn't have the pastel shades that Max has, and he only uses oils. He doesn't use watercolor.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm very well, Cameron. Thank you very much.
Good man, good man. Did you watch the racing this weekend? There's a couple of threads at which we need to pull, isn't there, Peter? Just a couple, just a few. As is compulsory, mandatory now. What do you think was the biggest story to come out of this weekend's Italian Grand Prix?
Well, I got to say, I think the drive of Max Verstappen, because that was a win as much for Max as for the team and the car and the work they've done, particularly on the floor and the improvements they've made. Because I just feel that the McLaren was at least as quick as a Red Bull around there, if not slightly quicker, given the advantage they had through the Lesmos. It was always a good example of how much efficient downforce a car has, and the McLaren had a massive amount of downforce. But the two drivers managed to overuse their tires again, not to the point where, they went to the other extreme, didn't they? Had a massively long first stint, as distinct from running a forced two-stopper last year. But they never seemed to get any better on the areas where Max was doing them. And I was thinking about that this morning, and I suspect the problem comes back to this whole engineering thing and how the cars are engineered and how the drivers are engineered. And the two McLaren drivers can only relate to one another. Well, the engineers only let them relate to one another. That is the overlay. That is the data overlay. And of course, they both are relatively similar in the way they drive. It's not like it was last year at Ferrari, where you had Charles as a mega short corner driver and Carlos Sainz as a very, very good long corner driver, and you had the best of both worlds. You've basically got both of them overlapping all the time. And they're feeding off one another. So if one of them's making a mistake and the other one's basically doing the same thing, that mistake is not going to show up. And that's the problem with engineering today. It's not only McLaren, but we're focusing on McLaren because they have such a great car. But I don't think I've ever heard a McLaren engineer say, Lando, just so you know, Max is doing something different on this corner, and it's nothing to do with the cars. He's just placing the car here and doing it like that. You might want to think about that. It's always Oscar's doing this, or you're up on Oscar here or down on Oscar there. And that's the problem. They don't think laterally. And again, I'm not saying it's just McLaren. I think that's across the board, really, except at Red Bull, where Max is the only thing that matters anyway. And so we had Max doing his thing, very patient, making sure he got the car straight before he really loaded it up. Doing really nice mid-corner steering adjustments at turn 1, turn 2, very quick through the Curva Grande, not worrying about being super quick through the Lesmos, just getting a good exit from the second chicane, being very patient going into Ascari to make sure he got the exit perfect for Ascari. And yes, he was coming across to the left quite quickly, but not to the extreme that Lando and Oscar were. And he certainly wasn't doing it on his quickest qualifying laps. In the race, it was somewhat different. And that's one of my points. Why weren't they saying to Lando, instead of this ridiculous diagonal that he's doing out of Ascari, why doesn't he do at least what Max is doing out of Ascari? But they didn't. And they just let him get away with it. And every lap, that was probably costing him, I don't know how many reps, but 50 reps, 60 reps coming out of Ascari, probably. You may think, well, that's not very much, but it's enough to justify the difference between the pole and P2. And so it goes on. And so Max just put his head down, unbelievably angry and livid after that first corner thing of having to give him the lead back. But he channeled that energy into a superlative drive, just perfect in every dimension. The team too. The team managed the race beautifully for him. And it was just a case study on how to win a Grand Prix. And that's what I take away from Monza.
Oof. Let me push back on you respectfully, Peter, because there are those that say about Max Verstappen that he's a fast car merchant, that he had the quickest car, nothing to see here, that that's the only reason why you could put it on pole, that it's an aerodynamic efficiency circuit at Monza. And but for that, you would have seen him sink to third or fourth like he's been doing all season. To that, Mr. Windsor, you say what?
Well, I say, well, why were the McLarens quicker through Lesmo 1 and Lesmo 2 as a result? Look at what's going on before making sweeping comments that mean nothing. It's just nonsense, isn't it? Of course, the McLaren was a more aerodynamically efficient car around Monza. Yes, the Red Bull had a bit more top speed because it's not as aerodynamically efficient, bottom line. And Max had to work on the areas where he could make up for that. And he did. And McLaren didn't. McLaren didn't. They just sat on this car that they thought was super quick. And then when they realized the Red Bull Max was blowing them away, it was, oh, well, our car's not quite a Red Bull around here. It's, we didn't think our car would be great around Monza, whatever the excuse was. And there you go. So, I mean, those comments mean nothing to me at all.
He wasn't bad, this Max fella. He'll do well. And for the revisionist historians out there, Max was a rank outsider, right? 9-1 to drop it on pole. Nobody thought he was going to be able to do it because the Red Bull has been rubbish. Peter, it was astounding. Lando said of the manoeuvre going into turn 1, lap 1, that Max was a bit of an idiot, alluding to the fact that he'd put me on the grass, super aggressive once again. What do you make of that, Peter? How did you read the incident first into turn 1 and lap 1, and then the ultimate overtake on lap 4 going into the same turn?
Well, one, I think Lando's completely out of order calling Max an idiot because he's not an idiot. And that was a very, very silly thing to say and not what you'd expect of Lando Norris. Point one. Point two, what was he doing on the grass? Everybody knows, if he doesn't, he should do a few more track walks, that the track gets a lot narrower going into the braking area of one. And if you're on the outside of another driver, even if that driver's leaving you a little bit of room, you don't just plant your foot on the throttle or feather it and go over the grass and hope that everything's going to be okay, which is what he did. I mean, what was he doing on the grass? He was driving off the track. There's nothing to do with Max. There was room there. He could easily have come across and filtered in behind Max, but he was desperate to get down on the inside, I guess. And that obviously clouded his judgment. And then he was never going to make the corner anyway. He ran way wide going into one. If Max hadn't run wide again, they would have touched. And that's why Max was so annoyed by the whole thing. It was nothing to do with Max. It was all to do with Lando. And yet Max had to give the position back. Well, had to give him a position that Lando hadn't really earned. And that was what annoyed him. And it kind of, I think, if Max had made a clean start, Lando hadn't been there and done that, and Max had just gone through turns 1 and 2 and led, I think he still would have driven exactly the same race. I think it's a cliche to say, oh, after that he was really angry and the adrenaline pumped and he just drove away from the McLarens. That's nonsense. He still did the job that he would have done either way. But deep down inside, there was that focus, that narrow-eyed focus that we saw when he got out of the car. And yes, he was smiling and laughing and the champagne was spraying and he was jumping into the mechanics and all the rest of it. But underlying it all, everything was quite sort of short and sharp. And yeah, I'm really, really annoyed about that. As well he might be, because he did nothing wrong and he got a penalty. It's about as big a penalty as you can get in Formula One when you're leading a Grand Prix and you got to give the guy P2 the lead. Give it to him, brake on the straight. That's a huge thing to have to do for anybody. It really hurts. I mean, I imagine Ayrton Senna being told to do that, or Nigel Mansell. It's just unthinkable. Sterling Moss, Jim Clark, anyone. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And we kind of take it now. And I think Red Bull made the right call because you just don't play with fire anymore. And we all know, sadly, very sadly, and I blame the fans of the Formula One world for this, for responding to an absurd survey and saying, we want more overtaking. That nowadays, if you are the overtaker, the emphasis of the stewards will always be with you. The other guy's got to give you room, even if you're going around the outside in an impossible pass where you've got two wheels on the grass and you're all locked up. The other guy's supposed to give you room because we want more overtaking in Formula One. And quite obviously, anyone with a brain knows that that's ludicrous. And Max Verstappen is at the top of the tree on that one for sure. It's a ridiculous rule. And, if anything, Lando should have got a penalty for nearly causing an avoidable accident.
Oof. Lando was quite aggressive in his defence. Do you think then this is Barcelona all over again, Peter, that Red Bull should have said, listen, crack on, Max, no. You know what I mean? You don't need to give the position back.
No, and that was what was so impressive. You would imagine after Barcelona that Red Bull would be in this thing. Well, we're never going to do that again until we absolutely know what the FIA are going to say. But whether that's Laurent Mekies, whether that was Christian Horner before he left, whether that's somebody else, whether that's just Max, I have no idea. But somebody with a brain at Red Bull has said, no, don't go down that path. We'll go the other way. If there's some doubt, we will always go in the way of give the position back, because there's no point in playing around with this. And I thought Max was brilliant in the way he handled that. They gave him the news, and I think it was about real time, as he's going into the parabolic, or just for the parabolica. They said, give the position back, Max. And there was a short silence while he turned into the parabolica. And then he said, you sure? And they said, yeah, give it back. And very calm, very nice. And Max almost immediately throttled off, braked a little bit, let Lando go past, and snuck in behind him. And then, of course, he just drove the perfect race. And whilst Lando made small mistakes out of the second chicane, out of the first Lesmo, out of the first chicane, all sorts of little bobbles that, it's just a racing driver doing this. Max wasn't doing that. And all the key areas where he had to get the power down perfectly, and where he had to make sure he got the turn in perfect in order to get the right steering against releasing brake pedal pressure, he was doing it. Patient, nothing aggressive. Well, nothing externally aggressive, and beautiful to watch. I thought that was an outstanding drive. And, shame on McLaren and Lando really for that. I mean, I'm a Lando fan, I'm an Oscar fan, but I mean, what was Lando thinking? To me, that was, poor driving.
Go on then, mister. I want to get techie with you for a second. What is it about Max to where he can take around a track that, again, it's the temple of speed, so it's quick and you need a slippery car. But like you said, Lesmo 1 and Lesmo 2, Ascari as well, you've got to have downforce. It's a Jekyll and Hyde track as far as Monza and its aspect. So what is it about Max's driving style that enables him to take so much downforce out the car and have a car that's super slippery in a straight line, but then nail Lesmo 1 and 2 in a way that Lando Norris, as near as makes no difference, for 53 laps can't cope with zero mistakes, as near as makes no difference? What is it about Max?
Well, bear in mind, Lando on average was 3 to 4 kilometers an hour quicker through both Lesmos than Max throughout the race. So it wasn't that Max was as quick as a McLaren or Lando or Oscar through there. He wasn't. The point is that Max wasn't fazed by that and didn't let that faze him. And he just focused on what he knew he could get out of the car. And I've got to put my hand up and say, I didn't think Red Bull would be that good at Monza either. And I thought they would be around Ferrari sort of area. But I had also, in my defense, several times this year, I've used as an example of Red Bull at Monza, how well they used to do at Monza, even when they weren't quickest in a straight line in the Sebastian Vettel days. And that was because with Adrian there, they focused so much on the exit of Parabolica and the exit of Ascari. And if you get those two bits right, you are up and running, no doubt about it. And what we saw yesterday was a lot of that lineage going all the way back, I think, to the way Red Bull always have a good setup at Monza, regardless of how much power or how quick they are through the air. And we saw that. And Max obviously is a part of that. I mean, he knows how to drive a car quickly in and out of the Parabolica. And you could see, we're only talking half a meter or so, but he was definitely turning in a little bit earlier than Lando and Oscar. Oscar later than Lando into the Parabolica. And Max just getting a lovely steering rotation just before he started to load up the car with power. And just every lap, exactly the same centimeter of road. That was what I thought was just a joy to watch, how repetitive he was. And there were no Lando flares of stones coming out of the first Lesmo. There were no sort of Oscar sort of not glitches, but sort of sideway squirts when he was getting the power on a bit too suddenly. None of that. And as a result, McLaren's tires actually went off sooner than Red Bull's.
Insane.
Now, it all came back in terms of balance on the mediums. There's a good tire, the medium. But in terms of overall grip level, McLaren lost more than Red Bull over the first 15 laps of the race. And that's purely because of the way Max was driving the car. Nothing to do with the performance difference between the cars.
It's insane, Mr. Windsor. He's a terminator of an F1 peddler in that he just doesn't make. He seems to not make any mistakes, or at least not at the same rate that the others do. He just, I can't explain it, Peter.
And I think Monza's a great circuit because it shows up those tiny, tiny faults. There's a lot of quick corners there, medium speed corners. You can get away with it, with all the Mickey Mouse stuff you see at most circuits. But when it's the first Lesmo and you run, a little bit wide, you pay the penalty over the lap. There's no doubt about that. And actually for the guys behind you as well, with all the stuff you're spraying over the track. And Monza's a great circuit like that. It's a very discriminatory circuit in terms of how you load up the car going in and out of a corner. And the other point about Max is that he keeps the car very light anyway. He's always got the car square and light, and when he's putting the power on, you can just feel that the car, or look at it anyway, the body language of the car is such that he's just got all the energy going in the right direction. There's never really a conflict between lateral load and longitudinal load with Max. Everything is nicely organized on the car. And when you take the downforce out of the car, that just enhances Max's talent for doing that. And everybody else who's used to having maybe a little bit more downforce than they need to, when they have a bit of understeer, they crank on front flap, or a bit of oversteer, in practice, they put on more wing, whatever it is. Max doesn't tend to do that. He tends to drive around whatever issues he's got. And so when he gets to a circuit like Monza, where the cars are light, he's in his nirvana. That is what Max does. He drives very light cars and he keeps them beautifully he keeps the equilibrium perfect. All four wheels flat on the ground. And that's what makes it look so easy, I think, for people on the outside. You quoted some stuff earlier on, people saying, oh, he had a great car, quick car, just a faster car, drove away. Well, that's maybe how it looked. Believe me, it wasn't easy. No. And all I can say is if you put Max in a McLaren, I think he would have been even quicker. Oof. And if you put Oscar in a Red Bull or Lando in a Red Bull, I think they would have been about where Charles Leclerc was.
Touche, Mr. Windsor. And Matt Bishop, friend of the channel, always says that you don't judge how car quick is by its number one driver. You judge it by where the second driver is. And Tsunoda-san again was...
Well, he was about to be lapped, wasn't he, when the checkered flag? Max was about to lap his teammate, a full lap of Monza.
Insane.
That's Jim Clark stuff, when he undid it, a lap deficit that he had in 67. But for Max to be a lap ahead of his teammate, the guy in the same car, he's not that slow. I saw Tsunoda win a Formula 3 race once, I think, at Monza. He's all right. He's average, he's sort of Richie Ginther.
He's handy.
He's all right, but a lap behind. And it was a pretty short race too.
Yeah.
It was a quick race, fast race.
Fastest race ever, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of meaningless given the way we control and change the regulations of the cars and the circuits almost by the year. But what I'm saying is there wasn't a lot of time for Max to go out and pull out a lap on his teammate, and yet he did. Unbelievable.
It's a second a lap.
A lap, not a second, not 10 seconds, not 30 seconds. A lap.
He's putting more than a second a lap on Yuki there in the same car. Yeah. Crazy, Mr. Windsor. Let me ask you about McLaren though, because that's the biggest. That's the hot topic that everybody's talking about. In the first instance, I want to rewind back to qualifying. Under the umbrella heading of team orders, Oscar Piastri was asked during Q2 on the back of a mistake by Lando Norris to give Lando a tow through turn 4, I want to say. What do you think about this, Peter? Are McLaren intervening unnecessarily in the championship now that the constructors is all done bar the shouting? Should they be telling Oscar Piastri to give Lando a tow in Q2 because of a Lando Norris mistake?
Well, I think you'll find that it was his turn to go out first when they did that. I mean, if it wasn't his turn to go out first and they said, nonetheless, we want you to help Lando, then I think, that's well out of order. But I think because McLaren take it in turns, don't they? And I think whoever's in front on a circuit like Monza, it's not unusual to ask him if the mood takes the engineers or the management, whoever it is, to try to help the other guy with the tow. That's pretty normal stuff.
Do you think so, Pete?
It's probably taken out of context. Yeah, I do. I think, McLaren more than most. It's all glad, happy, aren't we? All wonderful family together, and the constructors' championship is much more important than the drivers' championship, whatever they like to tell us. And so yeah, it wasn't that big a deal. I don't think that was a big deal. And I think you'll find that if Lando's in front, Lando was in front for another part of qualifying, they probably would have said the same thing. Try to organise a tow for Oscar as well. So you've got to be careful about these things being taken out of context. That would be my take on all of that. But I think obviously the big issue was the pit stop for Lando. And one of the funniest thing in the race, I forgot to mention in the video actually, was when they told Max on the radio that Oscar was now second because Lando had a long pit stop. And he's sort of quiet. And then they said, they've given Lando back to second place. And he said, what, just because he had a long pit stop? They said, that's not your business, Max, mind your own business. And he's quite right. I mean, what a ridiculous thing. A ridiculous thing in virtually every context, but not ridiculous in the history of McLaren. I mean, think about the 98 Australian Grand Prix when Mika Hakkinen mishears an instruction to come in to the pits for tyres, and when all they were saying was something else, like there's a direction of the wind change or something, and Mika couldn't hear it properly and came in for a pit stop that he wasn't supposed to make. And so they get on the radio to Coulthard, who's now leading, and say, "Oh, Mika just made a mistake and came into the pits by mistake. Will you give the lead back to him, please?" And DC says, "Yeah, okay, no problem." And so we've said this at McLaren for years, but nothing new there. But of course, the big difference is this was not for the lead. And as I said in the video yesterday, if Max Verstappen was dicing Yuki Tsunoda for most of the race and down in 14th place or something, and the lead had been Lando Norris from lap 1 and Oscar behind him, and this had happened, and then they said to Oscar, "Oh, would you slow down and give the win to Lando, please? Because he's been in front most of the race, and we had a bit of a mess with the pit stop, but we want him. He deserves to win." What do you think Oscar would have said?
No chance, mate.
Exactly, no chance at all. But because it was P2, P3, who really cares? It wasn't the win. And it'll earn Oscar a lot of favours in the team, for sure. And he did a favour. It's a bit like giving Lando the sprint win in Brazil. It was a favour that actually didn't mean very much, but will earn him a lot of kudos and a lot of credit at McLaren, because he might need something from Lando going in to the rest of the season. So he gave away something that was innocuous. He's probably got a lot of credit now in the bank as a result, and Lando can't complain about him at all. And so actually it was a very powerful thing for Oscar to do, to be honest. And I think Lando probably pleased, probably felt a bit embarrassed by it all, knowing Lando. But, you're told to pass him. It would have been funny if Lando had not passed him, wouldn't it? They'd gone down the straight at second gear. No, you pass. No, you go. No, you go. Oh, there's Charles Leclerc who's passed us both. To their credit, they didn't do any of that stuff. But yeah, it was. You shouldn't make too much of all that. It was only for second or third place. Who cares?
I just put myself in the Oscar Piastri position. I know he went into this Grand Prix 34 points clear. He's now 31 points clear of Lando in the drivers' standings, if I recall correctly. However, Peter, if I imagine, as you've just done, Senna or Nigel or Alain Prost over the course of the race weekend, give Lando made a cheeky mistake. Can you give him a tow to ensure he gets through to Q3? Ayrton would not be having that. I don't think Nigel would be like, what? Sorry, I can't. I didn't catch that last message. You mean to tell me that Lando made a mistake and you want me to carry the only other person in the championship with whom I'm competing? You want me to give him an advantage to make sure he gets into Q3?
But this is a very different team to all of the teams you just mentioned. I mean, the whole McLaren thing was weighted unevenly in the Senna Prost era, because Senna had basically brought the Honda engines to McLaren, and yet there was Prost, who was already a world champion, who saw it as his team, and Ron wasn't really going to get involved between the two of them, and there certainly wasn't much talk about the Constructors' Championship, that's for sure. Same with Williams. It was a different thing. Frank would say one thing to Nigel, another thing to Nelson, and none of it would make any sense. And it was just designed basically for the two guys to just go and race one another as aggressively as they possibly could. This is a completely different situation. This is a big happy family. They all sit around a campfire with tents, don't they? And with somebody playing a guitar and looking into the flames at night. And Oscar and Lando have their arms around one another, and Zach's singing nursery rhymes. It's a completely different team. And so no surprise that they did that, and they will continue to do that sort of thing. We're all happy. We're so happy. And one of them's already rehearsing. Both of them probably rehearsing the speech they're going to give when the other one wins the championship, and say how happy they are for it, how wonderful it is. And they're all going to do that wonderful big photograph of the whole team. They're all going to be cheering and throwing their caps in the air, and they're all going to look just as happy as one another, even though one of them's just had the bottom fall out of his life. But that's the way they are at McLaren. And that's presumably why people don't like them or follow them, and they don't have much popularity amongst all the community out there, because they're so sweet. I mean, it's not even sweet. I would say it's more saccharine than real sugar.
Okay, go on then, Peter. This is the conversation that we're going to have, and I think this is the I think this is the problem.
I don't know why you wind me up like this Monday morning.
Go on then, Mr. Windsor. I know you say that tongue in cheek, but as often with you, Peter, the length and breadth of your experience and knowledge speaks some truth, speaks some of these things into being. I'll give you an example. Only the other week, Zach Brown and McLaren were talking about having a conversation with both Oscar and Lando to establish whether they're happy if, when they lose, one of them will lose the Drivers' Championship, whether they're okay for us to celebrate as a team.
It's pathetic. This is the headmaster having given 6 of the best to sort of 27 pupils, then sitting them all around cross-legged saying, now look, you're effectively all like my foster children. I love you all, and some of you are going to do well in the exam, some aren't, but I hope you all respond and you all cheer one another. It's a bit like that. It's pathetic. These are Formula One drivers, for Pete's sake. And, well, he's got the 2 drivers. Well, I think Oscar's pretty resilient to all of that stuff, to be honest. It's just that he joined sort of McLaren once it was sort of all together with Lando and Zach, and the whole thing was McLaren as we know it today. And Oscar sort of was plugged into the back of that. For Lando, it's a different story, because he's part of the whole organic growth of McLaren with Zach. And how can you say to Lando Norris, if Oscar wins a championship, I really want you to look, very happy for him, Lando.
But how can they be having it, Peter? I think this is really a problem. Now F1 snowflakery is what we're talking about here, right? That it's become too. I mean, from a competitive landscape perspective, it feels like McLaren are now intervening and putting their thumb on the scale when they shouldn't. These things happen sometimes in motor racing. It's the infamous phrase, right? That's motor racing. Whether it's Baku 21 or Abu Dhabi 21 or 89 and Suzuka, these things happen because it's always been Formula One. That Lando Norris comes in and they try to orchestrate the pits, and then there's a mistake, and then that's motor racing, full stop, new paragraph, right? Are they wrong for intervening in the second instance over the course of the weekend and saying, well, look, we made a mistake. Lando shouldn't be in third. He should now be in second. Oscar, we're going to ask you to invert the positions. Is that not too far, Peter?
Well, it's all a function of signing a guy they didn't need to sign. And as I said at the time, the millisecond they signed Oscar Piastri, there were going to be millions of problems, exactly like the one you just described. And there are going to be more. And if you don't want that, if you don't want to have to deal with all these issues, you keep Daniel Ricciardo alongside Lando Norris, and you make it a very well-balanced team in terms of Lando's the guy going to be doing the winning. Daniel will back him up pretty well and win the odd race or two, but your focus is going to be on Lando. Or if you don't think Lando's quick enough, and you don't think Daniel's quick enough, you get Oscar Piastri and you put somebody else in the second car. But you don't put Lando with Oscar Piastri. That's what I've said from day one. If, however, all you want to do is win the Constructors' Championship, no problem. But don't start squealing when it comes down to Drivers' Championship crunch points and asking one of them to be happy if the other one wins. You can't do that. And you can't start playing around the way they're starting to play around. And I've always said, tongue in cheek, I can't wait to see what Zach's master plan is for handling all this. And we're seeing what his master plan is. And as predicted, there isn't one. We clearly saw at Monza.
It's insane, Pete. But I thought this was the whole. I mean, the papaya rules. I thought this was the point, right? Get sufficiently far down the road as versus the other 9 teams in the constructors to where it doesn't matter. Don't touch each other, but race each other hard. And now all of a sudden, again, it just feels like they're depriving F1 fans all around the world by almost incessantly now putting their finger on the weighing scales as far as the competitive. But they didn't in the British Grand Prix, right, Peter? When Oscar got his very harsh penalty for an inverted Cummins brake test. No, we're not going to invert then. But now, do you think there's favouritism at McLaren, Peter?
I think every little thing that happens or doesn't happen, or everything that goes wrong for one driver and therefore goes right for the other, is magnified 100-fold. Because we're talking about the championship. But what all the things you're talking about and all the things I guess the general public is talking about in this specific area are the same in every team. You've got the same dramas going on at Aston Martin, the same dramas going on at Alpine, the same dramas going on at Racing Bulls. It's just that nobody's paying attention because they're not in the running. But because they're out there and it is the championship, everybody's focused on every minute detail. There's nothing unusual about any of it. It's all just normal racing stuff. And yeah, you let the 2 guys race, but what does that mean? It's like the old Christian Horner thing, race, with Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel, race hard, but don't run into one another. Yeah, well, we saw how that worked. I mean, what does race hard mean? And if that was, you tell me, to me, it's absolute nonsense to try to run 2 guys like that into a championship. It's going to be defined by something like what we saw at Zandvoort. That's the only way it's going to work. That's not even working. It's just the luck of the draw, I suppose, is the way you've got to phrase it. Speaking of which, and changing the subject completely, I forgot to look last night at Fernando's explanation of the rear suspension failing on the Aston Martin coming out of the Scari, bashing over the curb the way he was. And to my astonishment, he said, I was very unlucky because I've been using the curbs like that all weekend and then it failed. And I'm thinking, I think that's probably why it failed. I mean, there's no luck involved in any of that. I've got to tell you. I've got to tell Fernando as well. It's nothing to do with luck. Keep bashing over the curbs like that, thing is going to fail, particularly with Adrian there. Now, no offense to Adrian there, but, Adrian's had his fair share of suspension failures over the years. And, of course, Formula One cars should be built to withstand curb hopping and curb jumping, but every lap of every session and the race, and Fernando admitted that's what he'd been doing.
Unbelievable.
Big admission. Sorry, we'll get back to McLaren.
Fernando, he should know a bit better than that, should Fernando.
Maybe he was misquoted or taken out of context or something. We shouldn't be too harsh on him because English isn't his number 1 language either. And knowing Fernando, he's pretty realistic. But that was the quote that Aston Martin put out, and it was not good. Didn't make the driver look very clever.
Maybe something lost in translation, but that's uncharacteristic of Fernando, who's normally he's got a reputation for being a thinking,
being a proper racer who understands motor racing.
Unlike him. Yeah. Maybe he's getting too old. Dare I say it, Peter?
I don't know about that.
Losing his touch.
I still think in a Newey car next year, he's going to be super quick, and the age won't be a factor at all. If he's there driving the car, which I think he will be, right?
I think he will be. I don't know about 27 though, Peter. Or we'll talk about driver silly season shortly. I just want to put a full stop on the McLaren situation.
Sorry,
No. Don't be daft. It's fine. We're talking. Is this race weekend, the Italian Grand Prix, proof positive now that Lando doesn't have the minerals, that when he has a gilt-edged opportunity, that all of a sudden somehow, almost too frequently now, that Lando, despite his being brilliant, despite him being a ridiculously quick F1 peddler, that somehow he's got a habit now of seizing defeat from the jaws of victory?
Well, bear in mind he beat Oscar Piastri. I mean, give or take a pit stop or two. He beat Oscar Piastri. So if he'd won this Grand Prix yesterday, let's assume his pit stop had been the same as Oscar's, and let's assume Max wasn't in the race. Everyone would be saying, wow, Lando Norris, mega. But of course, what are you comparing him with right now? We're comparing him with Max Verstappen. We're not comparing him with Oscar when you said what you just said. And compared with Max, Monza highlighted and reminded a lot of people of how many small mistakes, small in italics, Lando makes over, say, a 10-lap period, whereas Max doesn't. Yes, of course he makes mistakes. It's not that Max doesn't make mistakes. It's just that when he's braked a little bit too late or he's turned in a little bit too early, he's got a lovely sweet spot in which he can adjust all the variables and get the car still absolutely square to where he wants it to be within a millisecond. Because Lando doesn't drive that way, everything is on edge, even though his inputs are soft. Everything is as he commits it to be, and then he has to live with that, and then he just has to correct it, and it then becomes a mistake. It slows the car down because it's a glitch on exit, or he's having to move the car more than he should, put more energy through the tires at a specific moment. All those things are shown up at Monza, comparing Lando with Max in cars that weren't that far apart. McLaren had more downforce, the Red Bull more top speed, but it wasn't a commensurate thing. McLaren had more downforce and the Red Bull had a speed advantage, if you see what I mean. And so Max did a much better job. But if you compared Lando with Oscar, he did a pretty good job all weekend. And yep, he didn't get the pole. And I think that was more, he was beaten by Max, not by Oscar. He still beat Oscar. And I think that was, as I said, if he'd done out of Ascari what Max and George and Charles were doing out of Ascari, I think Lando would have been on the pole. And I'm absolutely astonished that his engineers didn't tell him about that, to do that, to stick much closer to the white line when he's accelerating out of Ascari and save a few revs on the engine. And they didn't, because they only focused on him and Oscar, as I said at the start of our chat. But yeah, Lando is what he is. I don't think he's going to get a lot better than this. I think that's what it is. He's very soft on inputs. He's very rhythmic on street circuits when he's got lots of changes of direction. He's very good there. He gets into a groove quite well. But he's always having to correct very small mistakes. Whereas Max makes errors that don't require correction. They just require adjustment. There's a difference between correction and adjustment. And Oscar falls somewhere between the two, in my opinion.
Yeah. Very well said.
But he hasn't enhanced the Max side of his capability enough this year. I think he's too much. It's a function of everything he does is kind of related to what Lando's doing. And therefore, they've both gone down the same path of relatively wide approaches and corrections rather than adjustments.
Peter, I heard it described by a mate recently as Max he's painting a picture, the Sistine Chapel, let's say, with an almost unlimited palette, whereas Lando's only using primary colours. As far as, I think it's a brilliant analogy, and again, it exaggerates the truth ever so slightly, but I get where they're going.
I would add to that. I'd say only primary colours, but he's got a lot of brushes. He's actually got a nice touch. But he doesn't have the pastel shades that Max has. And he only uses oils. He doesn't use water.
It's so good. Oh, brilliant. Mr. Windsor, let me ask you about Scuderia Ferrari as we round third. Lewis and Charles, again, they normally try and deliver at their home Grand Prix, but it felt like they bespoke wing, etc., but they still didn't have the pace, did they? What's going on at Ferrari, Peter? Okay, let me ask you the question this way: were there more upsides, positives that they can take away from the Italian Grand Prix as versus negatives?
Not really, because when Red Bull can turn up with a new floor, which for me was very significant at a circuit like Monza, and quantifiably have a better car out of the box. Friday morning, Max was, this is good. He was concealed on Friday by traffic and by various other things, but it was clear that the car was a lot better than it had been all year, really. And Ferrari should be thinking, why haven't we done that? Why haven't we come up with something that takes us a little bit nearer to McLaren and allows us actually to race McLaren on a circuit like Monza, where we should be good anyway with our top speed? And they didn't. They just didn't have. They didn't have anything. They were slow through the Lesmos, much slower than Max even. They were not very good through the chicanes, change of direction. not bad through the parabolica. Charles was pretty good there, and Charles made up for as much as he could and did a very good job, I think, to beat George Russell, who was on the right tires for George. The medium hard was a great combination for George, and yet he never got past a Ferrari, which was quite impressive by Charles. And Lewis was sort of there in Charles' slipstream, kind of trying to do the best he could, and didn't do too badly. But from a Lewis personal point of view, I think he will come out of Monza thinking, yeah, I'm right there. I'm with Charles. I'm right, where I should be at Ferrari. We'll see at Baku, but and Singapore. I don't say that cynically. He might well be there, and that's good. But the bigger problem is lack of efficient downforce, lack of downforce compared with Red Bull. Or even Mercedes, I would say. And I think it's a great shame. It comes back to all that focus on hiring Lewis and not enough focus on getting Adrian Newey. And it's not as if they had a plan B if they failed to get Adrian. We assume they did when Freddie Vasseur said, we're not going to have Adrian Newey, but we're going to keep the team we have, and I'm going to play a bigger role in the engineering of the car. And you thought, wow, okay, that could be quite good. Think of ASM, Formula 3, ART, should be quite good. And yet it's been terrible.
Yeah. Driver of the day, Sir Lewis Hamilton, Peter, buying or selling?
No, definitely not. Why would he be driver of the day? I mean, why would Max not be driver of the day? Who else was there that went quite well? I mean, what did Lewis do apart from just sort of not pass George Russell?
Worked his way through the grid from the back.
But even so, who did he pass? Carlos Sainz, Isaac Hadjar, Kimi Antonelli. Yeah. Of course, he should be ahead of them. But he didn't do much, and I wouldn't have given it to Lewis. No way. I would give it to. Let me think. Max Verstappen at the front of the race. Why wouldn't you give? In what respect was Max not driver of the day at Monza? That's a question I'd like the Formula One community to answer.
Concur. I have no answer for that.
Could he not be driver of the day, for Pete's sake?
Yeah, it's techie. Very, very techie. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let me ask you this question. A lot of people.
I'll tell you another guy that I thought drove very well was Oliver Behrman. I think he did very well. I wouldn't say driver of the day, but he was right there with Bortoleto after his pit stop. And, that Carlos Sainz thing, that's just a rookie not realizing how cantankerous an old stager like Carlos Sainz is going to get when he realizes his career's going down the toilet quite quickly. He's going to start doing, and he's had some really bad breaks from the stewards over the last 18 months. Virtually everything has gone against Carlos. And so if you're near Carlos now, it's almost like being wheel to wheel with Kevin Magnussen. You think twice about it, and you think, well, is it worth this ending in tears? And I'll let him go, and then I'll pass him somewhere else. And I think that, that's the sort of rookie. A rookie wouldn't think that way. He'd think, it's just another car. And I felt sorry for Oliver there, but then I thought he drove very well, actually. Blew Ocon away, didn't he?
Yeah, Ollie's been excelling of late. There's a couple of bits in there that I want to pull at Peter. The Carlos, in fact, let's do the driver of the day. Max Verstappen won driver of the day on 30%. Lewis Hamilton second place on 17%. Charles Leclerc on 10%. Lando Norris shortly thereafter, and Alex Albon.
Hang on. Lewis got more votes than Charles?
Correct.
Again, that doesn't make any sense.
Popularity contest.
George Russell. He had unbelievable pressure from George the whole way, and he didn't make a single mistake in a bad car.
It's a popularity contest. When you consider that Tsunoda-san got it a couple race weekends ago, like that tells you, I'm not even.
I think they should stop that whole thing. A bit like the point for fastest lap. Just forget about it.
I kid you not. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let's talk about Carlos Sainz, because I anticipated that Carlos was going to come into Williams and be everything that they'd been looking for: a leader, god tier levels of technical feedback, a guy who could understand, who knows what good looks like as far as a nimble, agile F1 operation, and that he was in turn going to blow Alex Albon out of the water. Why has that not happened season to date? Why has Alex Albon dominated Carlos Sainz Jr. with all of his experience and technical feedback?
Cameron, I know why you're now so popular amongst the community, because you're very good at asking questions which demean your knowledge. We all know that you don't think that. I mean, you're not that stupid, obviously, that you would have thought Carlos was going to do that. But you do that in such a way to sort of tee it up for me. But, it's very sweet of you. You don't need to do that. But we all knew. I mean, anybody that thought that Carlos was going to blow Alex Albon away had not been watching either or paying attention. As I said at the time, there's no way he was going to be quicker than Alex Albon. They were going to be closely matched, but there's no way he was going to blow him away. And so it's proved. And the only person that didn't believe that, I guess, was Carlos Sainz and his team. And I don't understand why, because they'd not been watching Alex Albon either. The guy is really quick. And, repeat, Quick, quick. And they didn't realize that. And they went to a team which is a bit faceless and a bit sort of middle of the grid, lacking in character, and isn't going to do much for his career anyway. And he was always going to be struggling to beat Alex. So why did he go there? I keep repeating the point. He could have gone to Sauber / Audi on a long-term contract with a really nice brand deal. And he could be in that car being driven by Bortoleto, driven very well by Bortoleto. I don't even know if he'd be doing as good a job as Bortoleto, maybe not, but he could have been in that car if he'd really pushed for it. And he didn't. He just went to this Williams thing because, I don't know, Mercedes engine or something. What was he thinking? And so as much as I like Carlos a lot, I have no sympathy because he made the wrong choice. And I think it's going to be difficult for him to sort of reboot his career because he's kind of now, as predicted, he's kind of now bracketed in the minds of most people as being, well, about as quick as Alex Albon. And that doesn't do any good for anybody.
Peter, I think the line, and I'm a very noddy B spec level F1 mind, self-confessed. But the reason why I think so many people, myself included, Peter, thought that Carlos would fare well against Alex Albon, I think there's a little bit of recency bias in there. Okay, so his last season in Ferrari, Charles showed him the way, but
not everywhere. He did pretty well on occasion. Mexico.
This is the point, Pete. So then previous to then, the first 3 seasons that they spent in the red car, Carlos Sainz was almost some say a Las Vegas manhole away from being 2-1 up in championships as versus Charles, who some say is probably one of the, if not the quickest point-to-point driver on the grid. So if you do the F1 maths there, Peter, and say, imagine in a hypothetical world, a parallel dimension, that Carlos is 2-1 up versus Charles, and if Charles is quicker than Alex, then you'd expect Carlos, once he plays his way into the crease, to at least be well represented, if not beating Alex out. I think that was the line of thinking, but it's just not what it's ridiculous. I just didn't see it, Peter.
No, and I think looking back, and also comments made at the time, when Carlos went to Ferrari, it was a very different feel for Charles Leclerc, because all of a sudden there was a driver in the other car who was basically doing the opposite to everything Charles does in a racing car. Turning in wide, braking in a straight line, trying to brake as late as possible, much more interested in having the rear working than worrying about the front, all those things. And I think Charles took quite a while to sort of establish himself on his side of the garage and where he wanted to go. And there were quite a lot of political changes going on at Ferrari anyway, in terms of were they a Charles guy, were they a Carlos guy, who hired Charles, and all, the whole history of the whole thing. But there was no doubt in my mind, even if you look at the way they were in Formula 3, Formula 2, that Charles was always a quicker driver. And so I just don't, Ferrari should not have got rid of Carlos Sainz.
Agreed.
I thought it was a very, very good team. Going back to what I said at the start, you've got Lando and Oscar feeding off one another's data, but they're both pretty similar in the way they drive, and they both want about the same things from the car. So they don't actually develop the car in other ways that they would if, say, Max or Charles were driving there. And it's the same at Ferrari. It was a very good combination, I think, between Charles' short corners, Carlos getting better and better, finding a lovely sweet spot the way he drives as well, making fewer errors, but asking different things from the car. And the car was not bad. It was getting better, sort of. And then they decided to replace Carlos with Lewis, who, if it was the Lewis that they wanted pre-21 or pre-22, then he would have basically been doing what Charles does anyway. So that was a bit pointless. And if it was the post-21 Lewis, why do you want him? What's he going to do better than Carlos Sainz? So none of it made any sense. From Carlos's point of view, and from the point of view of observers around the world, I guess there's still this cliche about oh, he's got all this experience he could take to Williams from Ferrari. Yeah, well, it's all nonsense, isn't it? They're just racing drivers. What are they going to take? What's Carlos going to do the first day he walks into Williams? Sit down in the drawing office and sketch the rear suspension layout and the loading into the gearbox casing and to the top of the engine and do detailed drawings of where the intercoolers are. Is he going to do all that, or is he going to say, "Where's the canteen here?" He's a racing driver, for Pete's sake. And that's why, going back to Cadillac, that's why I think it's nonsense to have Perez and Bottas. What are they going to bring? They're not engineers, they're racing drivers, and they're not even that quick.
Experience.
I mean, I used to be a big Valtteri fan, and to some extent a Checo fan, but they're not. By no means are they in their prime now. That's for sure.
I'd agree with you. They're both safe picks. Allow me to defend.
Well, not even that. They're slow picks.
Safe, slow picks. Yeah, yeah, you are.
Slow is safe, isn't it? I suppose.
Let me go back to Carlos Sainz for a second, because there's something that Carlos Sainz cited it himself in an interview recently. There is something that people call the Carlos Sainz effect. That if you look at teams that he's joined, and where at the time when Carlos leaves them, they're always higher in the Constructors' Championship than when he joined. Say Toro Rosso, McLaren, same with Ferrari, that he kind of a rising Carlos Sainz tide boats or F1 team boats. So, and I think there is something to that. But again, maybe there's more to that than absolute terms performance.
No, there is something to that. And when he was at Toro Rosso with Max, it was the two extremes. It was Max short corners. It was Carlos doing what he does, very reflexy, wide turn in. And that's not a bad, that combination is a good, healthy combination. It's like, it's like having pluses and minuses. It's like having good and bad. You can't have good without the bad. And that's a healthy way for a team to grow. And it was the same at McLaren. There was Lando, who was not as wide as Carlos and not as aggressive as Carlos and not using the rear as much as Carlos. And I think they helped the development of the car as a result. And Carlos looked pretty good. But when you put him alongside Albon, who basically is just a slightly smoother version of Carlos Sainz and drives the same way, there's nothing early corner about Alex Albon. That's when you have this sort of stagflation thing that we're going to see in the United States soon. And that's the problem, in my opinion. Stagflation for Carlos, not necessarily for the team, but for Carlos.
Wow.
And, it's difficult because how can he feed off Alex Albon? He can't.
And for those who are unacquainted, Mr. Windsor's alluding to an economic circumstance when you get stagflation, an economic market that's not growing, but is still inflationary. So you can't use your interest rate mechanism to control that. Blimey, Peter, I never thought we'd be talking about economics on an F1 podcast. As we ran third base, let me pitch a couple more questions about you, about Tsunoda, San and Antonelli. There's a lot of talk that Toto Wolfff has now is running out of patience with Project Kimi Antonelli and will expedite, therefore, wherever possible, getting Project Max Verstappen 2027. George alluded to this. He said if anybody's going to be sacrificed at Mercedes, that it won't be him. It will be Kimi Antonelli. Ergo, 2027, Max Verstappen and George Russell at Mercedes. Are you, Peter D. Windsor, buying or selling that?
I'm not really buying it because why am I not? I mean, if you ask George at any point of any weekend or between races, if there was going to be a driver change at Mercedes in the next 2 years, would it be you or Kimi? What do you think he's going to say? He's going to say, be Kimi, of course. He's the number 2. And if he's not delivering, he'll be out. That's what he would say. It doesn't necessarily mean, and therefore my new teammate's going to be Max Verstappen. And as I said before, I think Max is going to always want to see what it's like in 2026 before he decides if he's going to stay at Red Bull or if he's going to go somewhere else. And if he goes somewhere else, it's going to be how quick the car is and what his situation will be at that team. And if it's Mercedes with George Russell in the other car, I don't think he'll do it because it's too easy for George to take points from Max and destroy a driver's championship, because George is quick enough to do that. Why wouldn't he? If the car is good enough to win races and win a championship. If it's Max and Charles, I don't think he would do it. But I think he would do it with just about everybody else. He'd do it with Lando. He'd probably do it with Oscar. He'd probably do it with, certainly do it with Kimi. He'd certainly do it with anybody else. I mean, I think that's the reality. I just can't see Max wanting to drive a Mercedes with George Russell in the other car. I just don't think he'd do it. It's just not his thing. I can't believe he'd do that. I think he'll be pushing for Hadjar so that the team is lifted, and that'll be a good thing for them for 2026. And then he'll wait and see how good or not the car is, what the power unit's like, and everything else.
I agree with your assertion about Max not wanting to be in the same car as George. They don't like each other, apparently.
Well, it's not that. Even if they were great friends, I don't think he'd want to be with him because George is quick. He's really quick.
I mean,
Max doesn't need somebody really quick in the other car cramping his style. As I said at the time, Lando didn't need Oscar, and Carlos, should have stayed at Ferrari.
Agreed, Peter. Life is difficult enough already, particularly in F1. So why would you want to make your life unnecessarily more difficult? However, Peter, it feels like Max is...
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt your stuff.
Of course, Peter.
You made another good point, which was the Kimi Antonelli point. And maybe his love affair with Kimi is over. Now, that's an interesting point to make because Toto, correct me if I'm wrong, has positioned himself as the new great spotter of talent. And his talent spotting has been, Valtteri Bottas, George Russell, Kimi Antonelli, right? It's those three. So 1 out of 3 is not bad, I suppose. It's probably about as good as Helmut Marko's record over the last 20 years, 30%. But Kimi, what did he expect of Kimi? Did he expect Kimi to be blowing George away or what? I can't imagine that Toto was going down that path, was he?
I think he expected Kimi to be able to be quick enough, to be dangerous enough to keep George more honest than he has done, more frequently. Yeah.
Why did he think that? On what evidence did he base that?
I think there was, I mean, before we even joined, Peter, there was a growing consensus. I mean, Karun Chandak was saying, Mark Hughes, like there were loads of people saying that this dude could be the next one, that he's... You remember the private test? There was a lot of chatter about that he was 2/10 quicker around Silverstone than anybody else on the track, or F2 drivers. Like there was I think there was a, not that he was a force of that. It felt very Lewis Hamilton-y. Remember in 2006 there was a swathe of people talking effusively about how Lewis could be the next one. This time last year, ironically, when Kimi Antonelli stacked it around Parabolica, it felt like a very similar thing. And I think Toto started drinking the Kimi Antonelli Kool-Aid, probably a bit too prematurely.
Well, to my eye, he always looked very, very good on slow corners. Very good, sort of almost Max level, Hadjar level, Charles level, but looked completely out of his depth, anything approaching medium to high-speed corners. And doesn't seem to have got a lot better. A little bit more confident, but he's got about the worst guy in the world to feed from in the other car, George Russell. I mean, for somebody who's not that confident on fast corners to have to emulate George on a fast corner, I can't think of anything more daunting. So, and the odd thing is that they've got this sort of talent school going, and yet there doesn't seem to be a way of educating on how actually to drive on fast corners the way he drives on slow corners. Nothing to do with George. He should be driving the same way, the way Max does. And yet he isn't. And so, but that was pretty clear that there was a massive mountain to climb from Kimi's point of view, not because of the shunt at Monza last year, but because in general, he's never looked good on fast corners. No. And so why didn't they notice that? Why wasn't there a lot of talk about Kimi fast corners? Please advise.
I think there was a need to squeeze around Kimi Antonelli shape into a square Sir Lewis Hamilton hole. They needed somebody that was going to come in there, and Antonelli was the best person. And then again you justify that by everybody thinks he's going to be the next Ayrton Senna, and he even looks like him.
I mean, absolutely no comparison the way Ayrton drove and the way Kimi drove, even at Ayrton's Formula Ford 2000 level and Kimi's Formula 4 level. No comparison at all. Can't believe anybody would have thought that. Yeah, good number two, Jock and Mass sort of thing.
Do you think, would it be churlish? Would it be premature for Toto to wield the sword of Damocles on Kimi Antonelli and, I don't know, spawn him out to a Williams or a sister team? Do you think do you think he needs more time as a rookie?
I don't think he needs more time. I think he's had more than enough time, and he's got more than enough facility around him and more than enough people telling him how wonderful he is to be a little bit better than he is right now. He will obviously, with road dust, he'll get better. But they've got a very good team in a way because they got George Russell. They don't need anybody other than, an Antonelli or a Perez or a Bottas in the other car. If the car's any good, don't worry about George. He'll win a championship for you, for sure. And so Antonelli would be a good number two in that respect. But don't expect him to be anything more than that. And why would you? Because you don't want a team with two drivers squabbling. You want a team that's weighted heavily in favour of one of the best Grand Prix drivers in the world, i.e. George Russell. And that get the best from him. Don't cramp his style.
Agreed.
That's George. He'll do well with Kimi in the other car. So I would say don't touch it. Keep Kimi Antonelli. Don't make too much fuss about him. Let him get on, and whatever. He's got to be better on fast and medium speed corners. He's got to do a lot of work on his driving over the winter. Forget about the gym. Forget about photo sessions. Forget about sponsors. Forget about being an Italian star. Forget about all of that. Focus on fast and medium speed corners. Thank you. And don't do it in the sim because it's a waste of time.
Yeah. But they don't have testing time enough, do they? But this is the problem. Where else are you going to do it?
Plenty of other cars they can drive. You don't have to do
Fair.
it
Fair.
You don't have to do it in a Formula One car.
Good shout. Good shout. Finally, Mr. Windsor, let me ask you a question about Red Bull and Tsunoda-san. So there was a lot made of the upgrades and the car all of a sudden being fast. So too, there was a lot made about Lauren Mekies, that he's turning around the team, that no longer is this Christian Horner ball racing, that this is now Red Bull racing, that Lauren Mekies is humble. He's pushing more of the personnel to the forefront and promoting internally. There was a lot made of Pierre Vacher up on the podium because Max Verstappen has been apparently not too pleased with the car, and so not too pleased by extension with Pierre Vacher's work in his ability to set it up to a point where he could win races in it. Do you think that Red Bull have turned a corner, and does this mean therefore that Tsunoda-san's time at Red Bull Racing is probably coming to an end? Bearing in mind, again, just for context, Lauren Mekies was asked the question twice. If Tsunoda-san isn't good enough to be a Red Bull Racing driver, does that mean that he can be a Racing Bulls driver in 2027? Twice Lauren Mekies said, we don't know what the future holds. There's no guarantees there. Honda aren't going to be a partner next year, so who knows? What do you think to those two, Peter?
I'll be surprised if that floor was designed and built in the time since Mekies has been there and been able to reshuffle the engineering side of things, and that is a Meki floor. I find that hard to believe. I suspect it was already in the pipeline before the August break. And so therefore we should give a bit of credit to Christian Horner, probably, if you want to give credit to team principals. But the reality is they did a good job with that, and it's working well. And yeah, I think the team looks reasonably well balanced. Max is obviously quite comfortable with Laura, which is a good thing. And I thought Jim Perro did a very good job on the radio with Max yesterday. Very good. And I can see that synergy just becoming better and better as time goes on. And it's been good anyway, and it's getting better all the time. And I think they get the best from one another. Very, very good combination. The Yuki thing, for me, Max probably will want to have Hadjar in the other car, I think, if only because it's good for the team to have two cars going reasonably well, as distinct from just one car and the other car about to be lapped. And you get more from everybody. Max would be confident that he'd always have Hadjar, but won't be that big a gap. It'll be a gap, but not that big. And it'll probably be a good thing in terms of the new car and all the bits and stuff they've got to keep trying and doing this and that. So I suspect Yuki's days are numbered. And I think you were telling me, or someone was telling me that it's basically because Honda have paid for him up to Mexico. And after Mexico, the money runs out, and therefore probably then they'll do the switch, and they'll have to put Yuki back in the Racing Bulls because, they've got to fill that seat anyway, haven't they? And Lindblad, I don't know, he hasn't looked that brilliant, has he?
No.
All right. I mean, he's done all right, but right now, you'd have to say Fornaroli was the man. I've got so much time for Leonardo because he doesn't have a deal with the Formula One team. What a mega thing. He was a Ferrari Academy driver at one point, I think, and they dropped him. And he doesn't have any links. There he is. He won the Formula 3 championship. He's leading the Formula 2 championship. He's won a feature race. He's got a few good seconds. Cool guy.
Yeah.
Let's hear it for the Fornarolis of this world because it's hope for everybody. Instead of, rich families buying them like driver academy seats with various Formula One teams. He's out there racing and getting a bit of money from the local bakery and a little bit of money from the local garage and a bit of money from the Italian Federation. And they're doing a great job. They're doing a great job around him, and all credit. So if I was Racing Bulls or Red Bull or Marco, I would immediately think that is even cooler than being a Red Bull driver. I'm gonna put him in our car now. Mega, go.
It wouldn't be
If
bad.
I was Toto Wolfff, I'd be thinking, this guy's, his commitment and his self-belief must be astonishing. We need to take him seriously. But guess what? I don't think anybody will now because they'll think, oh, no, hasn't got a driver deal. Oh, no, can't go near him. Pathetic, isn't it? Absolutely pathetic.
So in the same way that Toto did to Kimi last year, it sounds like Helmut Marko's already has his eye very firmly focused on Arvid Lindblad for the Racing Bulls drive next year. He's their guy. And I think, he was brilliant at Silverstone last year, I want to say. Yeah. Reminiscent of Max at the Norris Ring, or Norris Ring even, but I don't know. They've got...
I don't know. I was just watching their body language after the sprint race, which Fornaroli won. And Lindblad, to me, already looked like a Formula One driver. The way the comments he was making, his body language, the whole thing looked like I'm a Red Bull star. And Fornaroli was sort of tripping over things and a bit sort of completely natural and wondering what was going on around him, and complete charm. I thought he was wonderful. And that's a whole slick thing of being a Williams Academy driver or a Red Bull Academy driver, Ferrari. It's all nonsense.
Yeah.
They should just let drivers be young and free and natural. And that's what you see with Fornaroli. Brilliant. Absolute fan. Total fan of his.
Oof.
I'm going to get his autograph, I hope, one day.
Let's go. I don't know that at all, Mr. Windsor. You've been a legend as always. Far too generous with your time, Mr. Windsor. For the guys and girls watching this, if you like and enjoy and learn from Mr. Peter D. Windsor's insights just like I do, and you're not subscribed to the channel, what are you doing with your life? How dare you call yourself an F1 fan? Subscribe. And then if you like listening to Peter D. Windsor on your favourite podcasting platform, is the Short Corners podcast. 5 stars and follow. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, like, share, comment, all of that gubbins. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, 5 stars and follow. Mr. Windsor, you're an absolute legend as always. Guys and girls, remember, between now and next time, to look but never stare.